Now, I hope most of y'all know that over the last 3 weeks we've been focused on spiritual growth. In other words, on how we might grow in our relationship with and our understanding of God. And during this time, we have looked at 3 steps that I think will enable us to grow. For example, during the first sermon, we considered how, when we recognize our limits, and that's the first step, we're more realistic in what we expect and more focused in how we approach God and more patient in our faith. And then, during the second sermon, we looked at how trusting God helps us grow, because faith is really trust. And it begins with a decision on our part, and it frees us to explore different ways we might approach growth. And then last week, we talked about loving one another, something that's pretty important. Something that forces us to turn from the values of the world and that moves us behind Jesus Christ and that leads us to change our attitudes as well as our actions. Now, this is what we've considered during the last 3 weeks. And this morning, we are moving past the midway point in this series, sermon number 4. And our focus today is on the relationship between our desire to make an impact in the lives of others and our ability to grow spiritually. Put another way, we're going to consider how when we work to make a difference in the world around us, we also make a real difference in our own lives. Of course, this business about Christians making an impact, it goes back to some of the stuff that Jesus taught his disciples. I mean, it goes all the way back to him, the founder of our faith. For example, just listen to what Jesus said right there in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, you, and he's talking about his disciples, he said, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Now that's what he said. Of course, every time I read a passage like this, I feel this weird combination of fear and guilt. You see, I find this stuff kind of scary. You know what Jesus said. I mean, I don't know that I want to be the light of the world, or a city on the hill, or a lamp on a stand. And there are plenty of times I'd be pretty happy just curled up under a basket, completely unconcerned about whether I've lost my saltiness, something that I wish my daughter could do. But being salty means something different now from what it meant back then. I'll tell you, I'd be nervous. I mean, I'm talking about really nervous all the time if I believed that everything I did and everything I said and everything I thought would be seen, heard, and known by others. And I got to tell you, my life is actually pretty boring. It's like I heard this former NFL player and coach say on the radio last week. You don't want to hang your underwear on the clothesline if they're full of holes. Well, I could tell you right here and now, there are more holes in mine than I'd like my neighbors to see. And so I find this kind of complete exposure pretty scary. It's like wearing a Speedo on the beach. That's scary, among other things. And I'll tell you something else. I also find it pretty intimidating. And for me, that leads directly to guilt. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. I mean, give me a break. It's sounds as though all Christianity is resting on my shoulders based on what I do or say or think. Man, that's a lot of pressure. And I'll tell you, I swear being a minister makes it even worse. Yesterday I was kind of looking online a little bit, and I ran across an article by a pastor who had done this little survey with his 12-person board. He listed several congregational responsibilities, I think he put in 20, and asked them to share the minimum amount of time he should average in each week. And this was the result. And you got to remember, this is the minimum, the absolute minimum amount of time he should spend, at least in their opinion. Okay, this is what it was. They said prayer at the church, 14 hours. Prayer is pretty important, right? Sermon preparation, 18 hours. That's important too. Outreach and evangelism, 10 hours. Counseling, 10 hours. Hospital and home visits, 15 hours. Administrative functions, 18 hours. Community involvement, 5 hours. Denominational involvement, 5 hours. Church meeting, 5 hours. Worship services and preaching, 4 hours. And others, 10 hours. Now I want you to know this leads to a grand total of 114 hours per week. And for some reason, teaching and leading studies and being available for phone calls and drop-in visits, man, that didn't even make the list. Now, don't get me wrong. I got a great job. Ministers have a great job. I mean, good night. We get to do what we really enjoy doing. But it's not a guilt-free job. Not when you're dealing with all these different expectations and priorities. But I'll tell you, neither is the life of any Christian. Man, then it's just not easy. At least not if you take seriously what it means to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Let's just say being expected to make an impact can be both fear-inducing and guilt-provoking. But having said that, I still think it's important if we want to grow spiritually. But in order to do it without paralyzing fear and debilitating guilt, before we talk about why it's necessary, and we're going to do that in a little bit, I believe we need to consider how. How we can make an impact. And what it affect and make it effectively as we can. For example, when we think about how we can make a difference, I believe our definition of where we're able to do it, it's really important. And let's face it, the where is really wide open. There are plenty of opportunities. My gosh, it may involve making a difference on the other side of the world, or in a village in Africa, or through all the opportunities now available on social media, like Facebook. Those are all wheres. But so are local communities and neighborhoods and families. They're wheres too. You see, where we make a difference isn't one size fits all. But I'll tell you, they do have one thing in common. They all represent places where and I'm talking about me and I'm talking about you. They're all places where we're able to reach. And my places may be different from yours. They're reachable. You see, we need to think about where we can best make an impact. Just like we need to consider who. With whom might we have an impact? For example, will it be folks who are hungry for a better understanding of the Bible or for a decent meal for once? Will it be for people who may suddenly have a lot of time on their hands or who may suddenly find themselves with no place to live? And will it be for Christian brothers and sisters who are facing hard times, or for non-Christian friends and strangers who are also facing hard times? You see, the who is just as varied as the where. And even though all those folks have very definite needs, I think we need to spend some time asking ourselves exactly who or whom we're able to help. And right after answering that, we better decide what we're able to do that just might have an impact on their lives. Of course, I think the answer to the what is going to be based on two really important factors. One, what do they need? And two, what are we able to give? And I'll tell you, I think the reason for this is obvious. I mean, if we're homeless, now I want you to think about this. If we're homeless, giving us a lot of canned goods probably isn't going to help. And if I haven't really studied the Bible since Sunday school back when I was 12, I probably shouldn't be trying to teach the theology of Paul's letter to the Romans. You see, as we think about how we might make an impact, I believe it's important for us to consider where we can and should do it, and who actually needs our help, and what we're really able to do in order to provide that help. And I think this is important to consider because it sets us up to start doing more than thinking. It actually moves us to begin acting. And I'll tell you, when that happens, when we take seriously that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, that we are a city on a hill and a lamp on a stand, in other words, when we begin to look for opportunities to make a difference, and I'm talking about a real difference in the lives of others, I believe as sure as I'm standing here, we are going to grow. We are going to grow spiritually. We are going to grow in our understanding of and our relationship with God. We are going to grow. And for me, there are three reasons why that's so. You see, first, when we decide that we're going to make an impact, that decision is going to force us to listen to others. I mean, if we're serious about this, it won't be good enough for us to just assume that we already know the where. And we already know the who, and we already know the what. We know this already. That's not going to be good enough. To do it right, we're going to need to know exactly where we can work, and exactly who needs our help, and exactly what it is that they need and what it is we can provide. We're going to want some answers before we move out on our own. And as we seek those answers, we're going to grow. We're going to grow in our understanding of the world. And I'm talking about the world that exists on the other side of our skin and as well as the other side of the stained glass. The world that we have, not necessarily the world that we want. And we're going to grow in our sensitivity to human need and human pain. And we're going to grow in our ability to identify those places where we can make a difference and those people who need what God has given us the ability to offer. Now that's one area of growth. One reason we'll grow. And second, this decision also forces us to look within ourselves. Again, we're not going to be satisfied assuming that all Christians can offer all things to all people. You see, because we recognize that we're individuals, called by the same God, but equipped to serve Him in different ways. It's crucially important for us to know what we can do well by ourselves and what we can do effectively together. It's sort of like Paul told the Corinthians. Now, there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are a variety of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. Now that's what Paul wrote. And to figure out how this applies to us, I think we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves. And to look at the stuff we can do. Things for which we've been trained. And about which we have a genuine passion. And to separate those gifts, those talents, those abilities from the stuff we don't do well. And for which we haven't been trained. And about which we really don't care. For example, I think I can lead a pretty bad and sick Bible study. And I use those words like my daughter and Dakota and Abby would use them. Which means the study would be pretty good. I can lead a good study. But we better have flood insurance. If you give me a wrench, you go tell me to fix the toilet. Man, the only way I'm going to know my strengths and weaknesses is for me to take a look on the inside. And that's two. And third, when we decide that we are here to make some kind of impact on the world around us, I'm telling you, it's going to force us to move closer to God. I mean, let's get real for a minute. If we buy this business about being the salt of the earth, it's not because we're salty by nature. And if we accept that we're the light of the world, there's not a person here this morning who can generate any light on his or her own. We're not light producers. And if we recognize that we really are a city on a hill or a lamp on a stand, I'm going to tell you, take it to the bank, we didn't get up there by ourselves. Whatever qualities we have were given to us by God. And at best, we're reflectors of the light. And we are where we are and who we are and what we are, because that's exactly where and who and what God wanted us to be. In other words, whatever power we have was given to us by God. Therefore, the only way we're going to be able to do much of anything is to move as close to Him as possible. And trust me, the closer we are to Him, the more we're going to grow. And that's 3. Now, I recognize that, at least for me, the idea that God has made me salt and light and that He's put me on a hill and a stand, I'm going to tell you, I'm probably always going to feel a little bit scared because I think that's more than I can handle. And feel a little bit guilty because I worry about whether I should be doing more and doing it better. And yet, regardless of how I feel or how you feel, that's what God has done with both of us. Because we've been called to make an impact on the world around us. And this is something we can do. When we begin to consider where we're able to act and who we're able to help and what we're able to give. And I'll tell you, when we figure it out, when we figure all this stuff out, and when we decide that this is part of our call to make a difference, we're going to start listening to others. And we're going to start looking inside ourselves, and we're going to start moving closer to God, which, when taken together, will result in some genuine spiritual growth. Amen.